also, then maybe getting into the context of kind of what's going on today, what we're seeing today at kind of in our different corridors. Central Corridor, which, as you know, like we said, opened in '94. We have about 1,800 spaces there, about 80% utilized. So, you know, if you think about it, most people on the parking end say if you're at 85% utilization, that's where you want to be. Pretty close there. I think that we did see an impact of T-Rex definitely on that number. I think it went down. I think, you know, parking at I-25 and Broadway and Alameda, particularly, I did see somewhat of an impact at those stations when that opened up in, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. Southwest, this is probably, again, our biggest parking issue, almost 100% utilization. So obviously there's a demand there for more than we're providing. So we do see that. Minerals is probably our prime issue, but, you know, downtown Littleton, which I park at every day, you know, again, that fills up by 7:30 in the morning, and, you know, again, it could use more, you know, potentially. But then you look at Southeast. Southeast, we're providing, you look at the level of parking we're providing, almost over 7,000 spaces. It's being about 60% utilized. Now, the one thing that we did do here that we didn't do in the other place, we did provide more parking initially, and this was associated with the fast tracks, but we were actually able to increase parking. But I think the thing that this is this gut feeling, and I don't have necessarily anecdotal evidence, is that there's more, as we become more dispersed with our system, that, you know, the demand level at each individual corridor may not reflect kind of what we're currently seeing on the ground. So Lee talked a little bit about, you know, the model and the demand is based upon the kind of the way things are occurring today. Well, as we add more lines, that dynamic kind of changes, and I think we see this a little bit with the Southeast Corridor, where not quite is kind of getting to the full expansion now. 9 Mile is a different example. 9 Mile is the one station, one of I think 2 or 3 stations that is essentially, you know, 100% full early in the morning. But we do have a lot of empty spaces in the Southeast Corridor today. And I think that, you know, this reflects kind of on what I would say our current policy is shifted towards, which is more towards providing more parking than maybe is needed in terms of the context of TOD, looking at the balance of TOD. And the other thing, which I know, I saw Steve in the room, I know Steve reflects this particularly well, is that the regional model doesn't really reflect TOD very accurately. And it's not intended to, because like Lee said, it's a regional model. It's focused on developing regional estimates or corridor estimates. When you get down to a station level, it's not very accurate at predicting, you know, looking at things like how does a mixed-use transit-oriented development impact the idea of mode share and other things. So that's another thing that, again, not seeing that maybe as we get more experience with TODs, and we will have more influence on the model itself. Now, what's happening with our parking management program? Like I said, we this started in February. The first phase was done. I think the first phase was some particular stations like Stapleton, Wagon Road, and others that had a lot of Skyride usage from those facilities. But now, essentially, what it covers is all the light rail corridors and a few key bus park and ride facilities that we do have this limited pay for parking. And let me just back up for a second, because Tom outlined it, but I'll just remind everybody. In terms of what we have the ability to charge for, we have the ability to charge for people that are parking overnight or people that are out of district. So anybody from Castle Rock that lives in Park County or whatever, that they would be, you know, charged, and that's looked at through license plate recognition that our park and ride concessionaire, which is Central Parking, does for us at these individual lots. And then the third one, which I don't think Tom mentioned, was we do have the ability on a limited number of spaces to charge for reserved spaces. So there's about 15% of these spaces can be reserved by people ahead of time, so they can pay a monthly fee to have their spaces reserved for them up till 10 o'clock in the morning. So that I know that's in place at Mineral, at Littleton. I'm not sure. I don't think it's fully utilized throughout all the systems in all the park and rides in the program, but a few key ones where you do have the situation where they do fill up very early in the morning. One of the things that we have seen is that we have seen kind of system-wide a decrease in parking demand, but I think it's really impossible to tell whether or not that's the influence of the economy versus the influence of the parking management program at this point, because we all know in terms of, we've all seen the effects kind of recently, in the last year and a half or so, of what the economy does in terms of employment, other things, budgets like everybody's going through right now. So we're not quite sure at this point. We don't have enough data to say that it's the parking management program that's having that influence, or it's the economy. We have seen some influence at a couple of park and rides, Table Mesa being one, where we have seen a decrease, in particular, that it's different maybe from the rest of the what's going on. What are the potential influences here? Some things have been thrown out that we did have some issue with some students that would like to park their cars there at the beginning of the summer and then go home for summer break and then come back and their car was there. Maybe some influence, maybe the idea of influence on a lot of passengers use Table Mesa to take to the airport. Now that they're being charged for those spaces, that may have some influence. Pine Junction, which I don't know if you know that everybody knows it, but we have a very small park and ride at Pine Junction, which is essentially on the Jefferson County Park County border. Well, the influence here, obviously, from our perspective, is the idea that people coming in from out of district are being forced to charge. Because I can't remember what the percentage, I think it's over 70 to 80% of the people that use that park and ride are from out of district. So not a lot of critical conclusions on the parking management program at this point. Kind of mixed results, but I don't think we've seen kind of a huge impact. We think that a lot of it's maybe due by other factors, but we'll see as it goes over time, and we'll continue to manage this. And maybe just talk about here in terms of the evolution of the parking management program. And John brought out the idea of being able to charge for parking at every station. I think we at RTD support that idea. Certainly, I think we're not going to go out independently. We know that that's kind of not an easy decision that we would make by ourselves. But certainly, if there is kind of more support for that idea, I think we would consider moving that forward. I think it's probably a little bit early to do that, given that we just started this parking management program, this year. But as things get closer and other lines like the West Quarter maybe gets closer to opening, maybe that's worth a discussion, a policy discussion, either through groups like this or at the board level in terms of the evolution of the program itself. So what's in store for the future? I don't think we have any plans that are going to change our current methodology. I think you'll see surface lots be the norm. I think that, given the budget issues and given the land prices that we look at, looking at a cost benefit, surface lots are going to be kind of our norm. And I think from a TOD perspective, my view on that is it provides a lot more flexibility. We haven't seen a lot of influence of TOD. We've not been very successful with joint development. Hui Lang mentioned the Federal Center example, which unfortunately I think we got caught up in the economic cycle and actually weren't able to pull a deal off there. And we haven't really seen a study of the impact of TOD on ridership at this point yet. In terms of the influence at some places that do have development around, it's probably, as we go over time, we're hoping to get some more of that. So kind of parking demand over time, I think we will see more influence on TOD, and a lot of this is my perspective in particular. And I think that I talked about earlier that as we kind of grow our system, I think we can see more influence and more spreading out of demand as we build our system versus kind of the situation where now we have a couple of lines that serve primarily the south area. Other influence which have been talked about, gas prices, kind of the whole idea that kind of the green or sustainability kind of perception of people today, and if that continues, kind of having an influence. And I'm sure there's bound to be other new influences as we move on. So that concludes our presentation, and I guess we'll open it up for any questions.